Hello, everybody. My name is Jacek Bartosiak. I represent Strategy and Future here. And my guest, the interview that we are going to have is with Velina Tchakarova. Velina, if you could just introduce yourself so that you don't, skip any important information.
First and foremost, Jacek, thank you for having me to this, inviting me to this very interesting intellectual debate that we are going to have. In the next 60 minutes, my name is Velina Tchakarova. I'm the director of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy based in Vienna, Austria. And our think tank is dealing with foreign, security and defense related issues in Europe and in the world.
Okay, nicely put. I, as I said, represent Strategy and Future, would deal with great power competition in Eurasia and around Eurasia, global politics and security. And this is like basically how sort of we met digitally with Velina by understanding that I think we share the similar mechanism of seeing the world. And this is why we decided to have this conversation so that our listeners could listen to what we think about the change that we see across the world. So, Velina, how is it all seen from Vienna? From Vienna on the Danube River, how do you see Europe and the changes around Europe and this China-US thing and the role that Europe should play?
Well, we start immediately with the $1 million question because as being situated at the heart of Europe, geographically seen, Vienna has really great geopolitical position on the old continent. I have the luxury of looking in all four directions and, getting a feeling about what the East and what the West and what the North and what the South is right now, worried about or concerned with. And let's be honest about it. We, in my view, are living in the most exciting times since probably the last 2000 years in terms of transformational processes. Now, the whole world, not just Europe, is witnessing these profound transformation changes. And specifically, when it comes to the geopolitical arena of international affairs, as you know, Vienna was one of the places during the Cold War which witnessed, all these kind of interesting international actors being active. Not just in terms of, it might sound very exciting in terms of, the center of European Center of Spies, but it was also the case that due to the, to the presence of so many international and regional organizations, we had all these relevant powers on the ground. So we could also sense the atmosphere, right? And right now, what I've been observing for the last at least several years is a similar situation where all relevant actors in the East, also the Dragon Bear, China, Russia, the Americans, also, on the other side of the Atlantic, and of course, the European powers are quite present here in Vienna. And that is for me the signal that something is, moving. And this kind of profound transformational processes that we are going to witness in the upcoming decade, I hope are going to be also somehow reflective here on the ground so that we can also make the proper analysis of them.
And how, but so what is your take on that? What is changing actually? What is the change, and how we should analyze, in which paradigm we should analyze those changes? Because, but let me add one more thing. We sort of in Europe started to believe in the 90s that there was an end to history, and suddenly within this European Union concept, we would navigate to the safe waters of the future, prosperity. What got broken? What happened?
Well, it didn't break necessarily, but I think that right now what we are observing is a kind of is the punch in the face by the realpolitik, which was actually more or less one of the most prominent schools of thinking in the 19th century, and was, for many reasons then forgotten or somehow, neglected in the 20th century. Now it's coming back. So what we are observing at the systemic level of international relations is a kind of, transformation from a more or less unilateral, system of the global affairs towards, in my view, more or less bipolar one, which will be centered around two powers, two centers of power, two main centers of power. The second, and that of course will create a lot of centrifugal forces, specifically at this regional level of middle powers. I mean, of course, Europe, the European powers, but also India and other regional actors. And Russia is going to be one of these, middle powers. Suddenly, that will have probably much more space to operate as a free rider, right? So this is the one thing. The second, major change is, of course, that this kind of systemic bipolarity will unleash a lot of competition among the regional centers of power. And this is also something that we are now increasingly observing in the direct neighborhood of Europe to the south, but also to the east. And then, of course, it's going to be, once again, a systemic competition that will basically entail all relevant socio-economic systems and networks, which are meanwhile so interconnected with each other that repercussions in our economic or trade system unleash unprecedented effects on, for instance, on diplomacy or on international organizations or on the global finance networks. So it's everything is very, very much interconnected, and that also means, of course, that we are going to observe kind of global supply chains reconfiguration. Everything is going to be bipolarized, and as a side effect of it, I expect that this kind of phenomenon that was started with Trump, with the Make America Great Again, is going to turn into Make Every Country Great Again. Basically, each, significant power will try to gain, to maximize its gains, to capitalize on this systemic competition between Washington and China, and we try to somehow navigate between both powers without necessarily taking sides, at least so long as possible. That's my take.
So sort of you imply that the nations will be the most prominent actors, and they will be more opportunistic, at the same time operating in the regime of zero-sum game. So as it was always throughout the history, and the dream of Fukuyama was only a short-lived aspirational thing. So I think we share this opinion in Warsaw. Mm-hmm. We were getting ready for this, for those times that we were thinking were coming. Unfortunately, we were underprepared in terms. We too much believed, really, in the 90s that the history had ended. And maybe because Poland was stricken by history so hard that we really believed that the West is a cohesive unit, and that the Western institutions and the modernization project would simply prevail over the global affairs. And that in that respect, our foreign policy was operating in the automated mode. Because the system, the global system based on the US primacy, actually was taking care of all problems that we were facing in our neighborhood. So it was not us that were supposed to do something, because the system operated to our benefit, at least to a certain extent. And now things will change. Things will change. In Warsaw, we think that the main reason for the change is the rise of China. And of course, the Russian desire to stabilize on their terms the neighborhood, the vicinity. And because Poland is actually in the critical Dimitrov position towards Russia, we have had 19 wars with Russia in the history. Because of that, we just feel a little bit preoccupied. I mean, largely preoccupied by this fact. Mm-hmm. What we think, though, is that You said 2000 years, even the greatest transformation. I used to in the public debate in Poland. I used to operate along the three thresholds that are in terms of historical process. For sure, this is the greatest change since the collapse of the Soviet Union and the systemic rivalry between China and US. I am also quite sure that this is the greatest change since this is the end of the Second Wall and the Bretton Woods system creation. But I also argue that this is the greatest change since the world ocean revolution, since since the navigators, the brave sailors of Portugal, Spain, and France and England moved out and ventured into the high seas and created the connectivity to around Africa to Asia and America across Atlantic, creating the sort of a new sinews of power, new connectivity that, by the way, contained Imperial Austria and of course the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in the duel here in the landlocked Europe. Okay, and structurally we're losing to and I think that the Chinese want to change, want to completely change the last 500 years of the history and recreate the connectivity across the landmass of Eurasia and around the littler waters of Eurasia by controlling the strategic flows. And I will end here. And Poland is on the way, as well as Austria, but Poland is on the way as an opening sort of a player on the Northern European plane. With Ukraine, we monopolize strategic flows across the landmass of Eurasia, and that's why we had so many wars. This is our perspective in Warsaw.
Well, that is quite fascinating because Poland doesn't have the luxury to not have a geopolitical, vision about the world, because Poland knows very, very well, unfortunately, what it means to be squeezed by not one but two powers. And basically what is going to happen at an even bigger level, unfortunately, is still the realization about it is still not in place in the European capitals, is that now that Europe is running the risk of being squeezed between two powers and basically without having the chance to, not just navigate, but actually, being completely left behind in terms of all indicators, if you take them and if you compare them for the last 100 years. But now going back to China before we're moving to Europe, is that I agree with you first and foremost about China's idea. Some experts say that Chinese don't have strategy. Others say no, that's strategic thinking, but actually no grand strategy. So I would put it as a connectivity vision for itself, and that is that Beijing is now in the unique situation to become basically the first global power that will develop simultaneously two connectivity strategies. It seeks to become simultaneously a heartland, that means building terrestrial connectivities via Central Asia or the Great Eurasia of course, to the industrial heart in Europe, and second terrestrial connectivity with an access to the Indian Ocean, and then simultaneously with it to actually establish control in its own rimland, which is then the Indian ocean region, the Indo-Pacific region. So basically the whole area which entails the most significant choke points for food and oil supplies. Now, if you look at it, this hasn't been achieved by any other power in the last 250 years. I mean, the Great Britain, if we take the Great Britain and then we take the United States as the two examples from the last cycles of globalization, technological revolutions, and connectivity of the global affairs, this will be really unprecedented. And I think that China stands good chance to do it. And that is actually the big risks for those which will have to face, a power which will be, operate in these two in these two major geo-economic and geopolitical scopes and spaces. And if you look at how we are going to actually counterbalance this, where are we going to build a counterweight to this kind of rise? On the one side, it seems to me that there is already a certain effort on the side of the United States as this rimland, country. If we base our premises on the theories of Nicholas Pikeman and Mackinder, that they are now trying to establish a kind of an Anglosphere network of countries that will engage China mostly in the rimland, right? I mean, take the South China Sea, take the Indian Ocean, take the Straits, and all these kind of important terrains along the maritime routes. Now, the maritime routes, which still witness more, I think, 90% of global trade, right? And like I said, all the global choke points are along them. Now, they are still very much controlled by the United States. So that's why we should also keep an eye on these terrestrial connectivities that you've mentioned, because this is where, for instance, Poland or Austria or all these Central European countries, in this very classic understanding of Mackinder, come to the fore, right? Because having control over Central and Eastern Europe would give an access to this kind of heartland terrain, which will then actually enable a control, or let's put it that way, global power projection. And this is where now this kind of connectivity projects, like I said, meanwhile, two parallel terrestrial connectivities, one via Russia, and the Russians, I mean, they have this kind of geopolitical thinking, and they seized the opportunity in 2014 following the isolation by the West to basically reorient themselves toward China, because they knew they need this, right? Not in terms of economic gains so much, but in terms of this kind of message that they are sending now to the world, that we can actually do something to counterbalance the US global influence. And then the second one is, in my view, equally worrying, and that one is the terrestrial connectivity via Central Asia, and then moving to Black Sea, Southern Caucasus, and now Turkey is, of course, also a player which wants to capitalize on this. And this will actually increase the pressure coming from China on Eastern Europe and then, of course, on Central Europe. So to finish this is one way how I see that there might be a certain, logical reaction on the side of Central European countries is, to build alternative connectivity projects. And this is something that, for instance, Poland is right now doing. And yes, on the side of Austria, there is still not so much interest, but I think that this is going to happen at some point. This is, for instance, this kind of, alternative connectivity connecting the north to the south in the Mediterranean, and then North Africa, which is very much promoted by the United States, but also I think European institutions are going to, support it. And this kind of alternative connectivity projects in terms of infrastructure, transport, energy routes are inevitable to happen. It's just a matter of time, in my view.
Yeah, but it is very interesting what you're saying, because we really share the Central European perspective with this, enhanced interest towards landlocked connectivity. Because I have a few remarks to what you said. First of all, I have been seeing in Washington, D.C. and across the United States since 2013, when I was really engaged in Aristotle concept in Washington and sort of understanding that China is on rise and so on. But I still, and even judging from your conversation with Edward Ludwig that was recently published, I see that there is a sort of a really miscalculation on parts of Americans. They don't understand the terrestrial domain. They don't, as a people of maritime domain, they don't understand that terrestrial connectivity. They really lack the level of sophistication, even so to speak, and this is really scary. It scares me a lot. But I will ask you for what do you think about it. But let me add a few remarks. Yeah, the second thing is that connectivity is the name of the game because that creates supply and value chains, and that creates sinews of power and leverages and anti-leverages and so on and so forth. This is a competition, especially in a zero-sum game, and especially if there is no hegemon, one hegemon that is, and the China is on rise, no doubt. The problem with Poland and the connectivity is manifold. By the way, I was the CEO of this project, the largest project in the history of the region. Solidarity Transport Hub, Central. Probably you heard about it in Warsaw. I was the CEO of that, and one of the people in the team that designed it. It was all about geopolitics, and it's still. We wanted to create the problem is that Poland lies on the east-west connectivity line, where the troops usually marched, and the greater powers want to create their own rules of the game to organize the strategic flows across the terrain, movement of people, goods, technology, data, troops, and so on. And if we want to control our own future, we can allow it. Okay, this is why we're so happy about the US dominance in the system. Historically, Poland was a prosperous country when we had connectivity north and south, not east and west. But of course, after the communist times, we wanted to join the West, so created connectivity, and we became the subcontractor of the German economy, and Germans have their own Mitteleuropa concept in place. In a way, we are happy about it. In a way, we are not happy about it, because it provides, of course, modernization effort. It provides money. People have money. We have growth, and Poland prospers. That's true. But at the same time, Poles are weird. We used to be the regional empire. So we have all those concepts, of being an independent player. Actually, this is why the world started in 1939, because we really thought that we could balance the game. Okay, so that was a miscalculation on our part. But so that's why we are a hybrid country in a way, because economically we are rather weaker than everybody else, but in designs and space that we need to politically control to feel secure is much greater than our capacity. So it has always been a very difficult proposition, that's why we are always so nervous in the European Union. We are always the most naughty boy in the class, and this is how it works. So we wanted to create north-south connectivity and connect to Romania to sort of connect up to the Danube River system, to the Black Sea, connect Baltic Sea, and Black Sea, and also to connect our eastern buffer zone of the old Commonwealth, Belarusian, territory, and Ukraine, and connect to our center of gravity in Warsaw. Okay, because geographically, it's doable. It's doable, and it used to be like that. Partitions by Austria, Germany, and Russians destroyed it. Okay, and we still are halfway to sort of restore the process. So connectivity is a game. And let me end also this part of our conversation by saying that the Chinese were pounding us since 2015, and they understood in detail our connectivity problems, geography. Mackinder, Mahan, Spikeman, I met them personally. And I find it completely ludicrous that some scholars in the West say that Chinese don't craft strategy. I mean, I think we should catch up. This is my personal observation. We should catch up, not they, in my personal opinion, in understanding. I think we went to sleep in the 90s, and they just woke up, right? Just like Mahbubani claims in his new book.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I concur with your view. stated already in 2015 that this has been the great geopolitical we've completely overslept this kind of shift in the thinking and in the, in the thinking and in the doing. And it might not look like a one grand strategy or like a comprehensive strategy or approach. And we've lost so many years debating each other within Europe, but also with our American colleagues, that there is no strategy behind, for instance, Belt and Road, and then later on BRI, right? So we basically lose so much time to actually debate each other on issues that are irrelevant in the context of the big picture. And like you said, connectivity is the great game. So I think that if there is specifically one region in Europe which will capitalize on this great shift in terms of thinking about connectivities, because like I said, it's not just about transport or about energy, but also infrastructure. This is going to be central in Europe. This is certainly going to be one of the regions, I think, that are going to face further pressures for obvious reasons, but can also capitalize if prepared properly, if, of course, and mostly if in a coordinated manner. These single games are not going to work out well for us here in Europe, like I said. And one of the reasons is that all European powers are small in the context of the great powers competitions. It's just that, like, I've forgotten who said that, but as someone said, it's just that some of the European powers haven't realized it yet.
Cool.
But in the context of the great powers competition, we are all small powers here on the old continent. We have one geo-economic actor, that is the European Commission, that is the only body that can really be on par with the United States and China when it comes to negotiating complex trade deals. That's the reality. But, and let me be very, very clear about it, the European Union and its institutions cannot be a geopolitical actor. We cannot expect from bureaucrats to play the role of a geopolitical actor. What we can do in a concert, of course, among the European powers is how to actually bundle this geoeconomic potential that we still have, so long as we have it, so that we actually derive from it a geopolitical potential and use it for those spaces that we still have the capabilities and the capabilities to shape. And that is the reality. And let me give you one example. I mean, there was been a lot of discussion about the investment deal with China. I mean, in reality, it was the right thing to do. It was just a very unfortunate timing. It was very unfortunate timing. It gave a lot of strategic clout unnecessarily, but in the greater context of geoeconomic, projection, power projection, it was the right thing to do. It was done in a very improper way. Bad timing, unprepared. The Chinese used the opportunity that we were in a Christmas festivity mood, and there were no bureaucrats or people who were looking at the texts, and also we still don't have any idea about the texts, to be honest, in the European capitals. A lot of bullet points to be covered, but in the great context, we still have this power through the negotiation, capabilities of our European institutions. We should use it. We should use it, but we cannot project it.
So you are close to Germany, by language, so to speak, and Austria. I mean, Österreich at the end of the day is much closer to Germany than Poland. So what is the debate in Germany regarding this deal with China? What are the cons and pros, and why did the Germans sign it? I mean, why did they push for signing? What is your opinion?
Well, I can only present you with my reading. Of course, I can tell you what the German media is saying and what German politicians, leading German politicians, are saying. But maybe I should.
Your reading is the most interesting for me.
I should present you my reading, which is very neutral in a sense that I'm just looking at all these events and processes in a very emotionless way, trying to apply the rationale of realpolitik, and that's all. Just to clarify it. And my reading is that, the Germans were in a hurry to do it because there is going to be a shift of the German leadership in this year. There's going to be elections. The chancellor is going to be elected. That means, of course, probably also a shift in the German politics towards China. That was one thing, I think, this kind of rush to go back to normality, if you can put it that way, if you like, for business, for German industry, because German industry is still very much, expecting a lot from the bilateral relationship between Germany and China. So this kind of rationale of going back to business, going back to normality, I think is going to backfire very, very soon. Because nothing is going to be, is going to look or be the way it was prior to COVID-19. But that is the reading, that is their rationale, that is their expectation. They need the profits because also of the repercussions of, the COVID-19 crisis. So it's this short-term oriented thinking, more or less. I think this was, and then of course to, send a, signal because, who knows what the Americans under the new administration will come up with as a proposal. And then I suppose that there was also the understanding that if they wait for the new US administration, to set the agenda for the transatlantic partners, there's not going to be any space for any deals. And if we look at the reactions coming from Washington, from the close circle of Joe Biden, this was basically the reading, right? So it was already clearly, pretty clear that, the advisors of Biden were not very happy with what was going on, in terms of bilateral relations. So I think that this was also one of the rationales to do it now, because later we won't have any possibility to do it any longer.
My reading is completely based on real politics, and I think that the Europeans made a good decision in that respect in terms of the balancing game, because the Americans treated the Europeans over the last 3 years as a junior partner, actually the weaponizing its hegemony, dollar system, sanctions, and so on, and actually but breaching the Crow Memorandum from the beginning of the 20th century. Of the British diplomat who said that, if you want to keep the system open as a maritime hegemon, you cannot sanction the other parties because they will ally against you. And actually, this is what happened. Subconsciously, maybe even they didn't read the Crow Memorandum in Berlin, but they wanted to have all options on the table with the new administration coming. They want to restrain their options. And this is the basic definition of real power, of real politics.
Mm-hmm.
Aside the values, I mean, too much discussion about values. It's always about options and maneuverability of options, and this is what they did, and they leveled the playing field. Now the Americans will need to talk to the Europeans, and the Chinese will need to talk to the Europeans, and the Europeans may say that we will be ratifying for 2 years. I don't know what's going to happen. So you keep the options in your hands.
Exactly. You keep the options on the table.
But at the same time, I hope that finally this dreaming about values-based system will collapse in that, because that created a lot of frustration across the Western world. And what Poles think now is that of course there is a shock of this because of the signing, because we really wanted the US to be in Europe, right? But the problem is that And of course, in the ideal world, it would be great if Europe could be a great power, but it takes a lot of stuff to add to become a great power and really stabilize this perimeter. Europeans would need to have a power projection and negotiate the space with Russia, with Africa, with Turkey, with even with the United States, because the United States can penetrate the European peninsula however and whenever it wants. It was to Poland's benefit, but I'm not sure if it's to French benefit or Italians or Germans in that respect. So, but penetrating by political leverage. So this is the fundamental question about the future of Europe. And that Germans will need to make this decision. And Poles will be watching. Will be watching closely. If Germans make a decision to create an empire and have this finally this Hamilton's moment, also with signing with China, then the Eurasian landmass will be created. But Germans will need to make sure that the eastern perimeter is secured, and Germans will need Poland as an ally to do it. Because the balance of power, there will be a shift of balance of power across the European peninsula from France eastwards because of the German supply chain, which makes better profits in the east, in Poland and Romania. And France will lose. So all those forces that since the fall of the Roman Empire never allowed for the Europe to become a one empire will be playing against this scheme. Fascinating times. Mm-hmm. So let me put one more sentence. Either in 20 years' time, we will end up as a sort of united organism, confederated, maybe not federate, but confederated, playing as an actor with the power projection capabilities, and Germans will need to pay for that because they have made a lot of profit out of the system over the last 30 years. Or we will be a forgotten place, as China became in the 19th century, played against by China and Russia and United States with no modernization project. A place that used to be a dream place and stopped being a dream place because of demography, lack of modernization, and lack of connectivity. We are at the crossroads in Europe. That's my personal opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that pretty much overlaps with my scenarios for Europe, with my macro outlook for Europe. Right now, I'm more inclined to think that we are moving towards my great fragmentation line scenario. That means we are going to observe fragmentation lines created along the geopolitical and the geoeconomic interests of relevant external actors on the old continent. And I don't only mean rivals and competitors such as China or Russia or Turkey, but I also mean partners such as, for instance, United States. Cherry picking also their partners, their most loyal partners, their most loyal, allies. I think that at least that's my call, and I think that these fragmentation lines are going to get deepened because it creates this kind of scenario, creates a lot of incentives for the external actors to operate on the ground, first and foremost. Second, it creates, it opens spaces to operate. Third, what is really very worrying is that they can also bundle forces, such as the case, for instance, with Russia and Turkey, the rapprochement. But even though that they are still very much, sharing very conflictual interests on many issues, but when it comes to Europe, interestingly, they have quite good ideas as to how to shape, for instance, certain neighborhoods and certain, certain terrains. And, if you look at Turkey, how it has penetrated Eastern Europe, the near abroad of Russia without anything, to happen to them, basically, more or less. It's absolutely fascinating. I mean, I've been making this call for at least last 5 years, that Russia has been continuously losing influence in its direct neighborhood in Central and Eastern Europe. However, it has also managed to solidify the shrinking influence. So this shrinking influence on the ground has been facilitated, has been solidified, strengthened, but it has been constantly shrinking, and that is something that, as a trend, hasn't been read correctly by many experts. Pointing to they are more assertive and more competing. No, and the very fact that now they are actually sharing a common common space with Turkey in South Caucasus. Turkey is looking for access to the Caspian Sea, and then to the Central Asia, and then of course basically trying to turn around the terrestrial connectivity of China so that it has placed itself strategically before the Chinese start operating on a daily basis, because it's coming, more or less. It's just a matter of time. So I think that this kind of scenario is more realistic for now. I'm not convinced, to be honest. I of course welcome all the great initiatives being launched by the European institutions. However, as someone coming from from a system that has been pretty much ruled top down by a lot of bureaucrats, I'm not convinced that this is the way how we will actually come out with something fresh, when we will adjust to the challenges of the time. We need something very unorthodox. I don't think that just pouring liquidity into projects, into trillion worth projects, top down is the only way to do it. It's going to be much more needed on our side here in Europe in order to to move on and to really come out of this very risky second scenario, which was your first scenario, actually, which really worries me most, because well, I have some proposals, of course, but I think that the realization that each European power has to do everything, basically, each European power, each European member state has its vision about everything that concerns the European Union and our role in the world, right? So we know each member state, now 27, has an idea about each single policy and each single field. And I don't share this view. I think that we should finally split roles and admit to itself, I mean to ourselves, that we cannot deal with it that way. What do I mean? We should actually find out which are our probably 2 to 3 functional strengths, like one organism. I understand very well that each member state wants to be the heart and the mind of this great project, but it's just not the way how it works. And if you look at the human body, each single organ has exactly one very specific role to play, and you cannot remove any of these organs. So each organ plays an equally important role for the whole. So long as we don't understand this, we are going to move with this very tragic, pace, basically, muddling through, doing something, debating each step. Anything that is proposed right now is being debated for years instead of doing something. And one final point, this functional split of roles, I think, is something that will demand a lot of courage, is very unorthodox. But think about it. Do you really want to have for instance, European Union, Russian, policy being shaped by the Spaniards? Or do you really want, I suppose that the Italians don't want to have, Mediterranean policy in the southern neighborhood being shaped by the Estonians, for instance.
So what do you think? How should the roles be split? And who should be in charge of that?
Well, first and foremost, I think geographically it's very obvious that we should have at least 1, 2 leaders in terms of regional, priorities, regional prioritization. For us, for Europe, the regional prioritization is clear. We have 3 direct neighborhoods that will be contested in the upcoming decades. The Arctic, the Eastern, and the Southern neighborhood are going to be contested by many, not just by 1 or 2, but many will going to try to penetrate and use the space for their own gains. I mean, look at the North African space. It's not just about the Americans or the Chinese or the Russians. I mean, meanwhile, it's about the Gulf states, and it's about the Turkey, and it's about India. Even India is trying to somehow, arrive. So we need, for instance, if we take the southern neighborhood, we cannot move on if we have geopolitical clashes between the French and the Italians. And the very same thing happens in the Eastern European neighborhood, where we have, a clear vision where we stand on Russia. But then again, we have some European powers that are still trying to capitalize on geoeconomic gains, leaving aside the geopolitical constraints, right? So it's not going to work that way.
Yes, this is why the future of Europe looks bleak, because it's going to be very difficult to deliver cohesion. Let me give you that's why I'm pessimistic, although I like Europe. Let me give you an example from my Polish soil. Who is going to run the policy towards Russia? French president? So Poland, okay, so there is one interest that is non-negotiable with Poles. For the last 500 years, the most important factor of our grand strategy was to keep Russia out of the cis-European system. And we succeeded for the most part of this period of time. With the first partition, we lost. And then there was a seven years war and the Napoleonic Wars. Russia became important for balancing efforts of other countries. And Russia was invited, either by Germans, Prussians, or French, or English, to play the balancing game against another. We regained independence when Russia lost the war against Germans in the First World War, and then lost its social cohesion during the revolution, and because they were defeated by the Polish troops in 1920 in the war. And then they were out of the system for 20 years. When they were back in the system, that they could be used as a leverage against another nation's interest, they signed the Continental Pact between Ribbentrop and Molotov. And they were again in Yalta and Potsdam. With the demise of the Soviet Union, they were again out of the system, and we regained independence, along with our Eastern Buffer Zones countries. And because Russia cannot provide any prosperity, any civilizational, aspect, what they do, they want to contribute and become a factor in the European system by leveraging the military power in the new generation warfare with this versatile system of, intimidation pressure. And France bought it because they need Russians to balance Turkey, to dream about connectivity to China. So President Macron dares to come to my region and talk over our heads. So this is the message that I want to send out. Poland didn't block it because for the last 30 years, we have exercised strategic constraint, believing in the cohesion of the West. But here on the ground, we have the leverage to make things impossible for the French. If it really comes to the real great, hardball play, okay? We are neighbors of Ukraine and Belarus, okay? We have had 19 wars with Russia. And right now, after the Belarusian crisis in August, we are moving to a new phase. We already are abandoning the dream of the cohesion of the West, and there will be a new strategy of Poland. We will get ready for the new generation warfare and to negotiate the Eastern Perimeter with Russia and the escalation ladder. And if Germans understand that, they will join. But we'll never abandon this policy. That's how it is. And what I'm saying is that it's very difficult. If there is really to be one Europe, France will need to abandon its ambitions because it's in a bad place on the European continent and it doesn't have sufficient leverage. So it's going to be very difficult to deliver because the French will never accept it.
I think that they will come to terms, the French, because they are not that power from the, from previous centuries that can, cope with the complexity of the global affairs nowadays. They are quite challenged in their own, geopolitical space in the South and need help. So obviously they are no longer, doing this alone, but in a concert with also, the help of European missions and other European partners, and also international partners. Just to give you one example, they came to terms also to the realization that, the Mediterranean, which was basically, take Libya, for instance, was actually Italy's priority, more or less. It led to this kind of unnecessary clash between the two European members. And at some point they will realize that it leads to nothing. It leads to basically lose-lose game, because the rest of the actors won't wait, will not wait, for them to come along, but will use this vacuum to, fill the gaps. And then again, of course, this, I think Russia, I think that's, like I said, only my personal reading. I think that this so-called rapprochement by the French, as you said, was more or less initiated, by these constraints and, personal goals to cope with Turkey specifically. That's why they thought that if they go to Moscow, they will somehow manage this relationship. But then again, because you gave the example with a very, very, complicated relationship between Poland and Russia, and you say never, and I always, as a geopolitical expert, I always tend to remind ourselves of the word never, because if you look at what happened with Turkey and Russia, and you go back to the history of these two powers, these have been two empires being engaged in so many bloody wars on the Balkans and in Eastern Europe and everywhere, and they still somehow have managed to, to cope with each other. So I think that there is never a kind of a never situation. And why I'm saying this now from a systems analyst's point of view, I found very striking what Edward Luttwak said in our conversation about Russia's role as a free rider in the global affairs, because now, roles have switched. At some point, even though that they are now engaged in this kind of systemic coordination with China, that the so-called dragon bear, which really worries me, specifically when it comes to defense cooperation, know-how transfer, things that the Russians might want to give to the Chinese, in order to help them build a kind of, counterbalance to the Americans. These things really, really worry me, and have been worrying me for the last 7 years. Now, I think that, and this is what he said, I mean, we should never underestimate that that they have been, trying this already in previous episodes, and you mentioned the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, but as soon as it got really, really messy, they chose the right side.
I agree.
He said that in terms of military, if this competition between the Chinese and the Americans starts, becoming more volatile and tense and threatens to, turn into a military conflict, he said that actually he would not exclude the possibility that Russia would join, once again,
United States.
the West. Yes, but of course, until reaching this important threshold, it's just in the nature of this political actor to disrupt. They don't create alliances.
Of course,
they
Velina.
disrupt alliances.
I agree, and
So,
we realized that in Warsaw. We realized this. Actually, we think that it's quite probable that there will be a reverse Nixon move, because I think the United States is going to lose the war in the littoral waters of the Western Pacific if Russia is not pressing on the continental domain against China.
So let's be realistic about it, that so long as we are not in this, because you also asked me what will move European powers into, more kind of strategic thinking or splitting of roles. I think what will be the case, strategic necessity, once it gets really, really hot in the direct neighborhood.
I know, Velina, I agree, but this is a threat to Poland and our countries in the East, because Russia will want something in a bargain. And
absolutely. So it's not going to be a gift. It's not going to be for granted. It's going to be.
This is why I said never, because we will never accept it, and that will be a great. And we exercised that already. I mean, we experienced that before. So. So this is a game on this Eurasian, chessboard.
But to say that we don't have options is something that is for me, also quite interesting as in terms of how easily we give up on ourselves. Even if you look at the intellectual debates nowadays, I think they have been, I think, even coming from Poland, proposals what can be done in order, for instance, to provide, more sophisticated, military power. Because let's be honest, we cannot. Why we cannot derive geopolitical cloud from our geo-economic power projection? Well, because. And this is also something that Ludwig exemplified very well. I mean, you, as a great power, you can decide to, stick to your diplomatic cloud, make some nice deals, be respected by all the rest of, international players. But without the military cloud, and this is the case with Europe, we are not going to, sit on the negotiation table. And my proposal in that matter is, because I'm not convinced that the way how we are doing this right now is going to be fast enough, efficient enough. I'm not saying it's not good. At least it's something, but it's once again this very European way of doing things that is, very much 20th century like. But we are in the 21st century. We are in this great acceleration. We have to do things once again in a very unorthodox way. If we have a trend, and it's a very obvious trend, of emerging security, private security companies, and we know that, and we've seen what is happening in Nagorno-Karabakh and in other conflicts. So we should think how we can actually build a military unit that is probably not situated within the common security and defense policy, is not bureaucratized. We do not need more bureaucratized initiatives. We need initiatives where powers that want to do can do. Okay, so one possible way is just to think about something like public-private partnership. Why not creating our own, European battle unit that is actually deployable in only, let's say, 2 or 3 regions, and with only a strict mandate. But then we have you don't have a bureaucracy behind it, and you don't need 2 years, to agree on it. You just pick on the countries that want to participate, and then you say it's on a voluntary basis for soldiers from all member states, but also from all associated states, because countries like Ukraine or Georgia are going to, I mean, people from these countries are going to participate in this kind of units. And then you have like Southern and Eastern neighborhood, and you can deploy this unit quickly without all these discussions and all this kind of, all these debates. And then, of course, one might say, yeah, but we, once again, because of our values, we cannot promote mercenaries concepts, right? But then again, if we act based on our values and try to survive in such a volatile environment based on our values, nobody will respect these values. The values that we have, we should strengthen them, and we should protect them inwards within our community. These are our values within our big European family. These are our values, but we should not project them onto the outside world. We should operate in a very volatile world in which we operate the way how the others operate. That means we strive for survival, and we have one common goal. This is one thing I think where all the European powers will agree on, small, medium, and big ones. And that is that we don't want to be squeezed in these great power competitions. We want to protect our place there.
That's true. I fully agree with your comments about the real punch, and that the values are underpinned by power. So
and not the other way around. Not the other way around.
Not the other way around. And it's time to wake up. And this is why Poland, I think, is moving to the direction of creating its own force that will be capable of fighting the new generation warfare in the East. And we are waiting for the final outcome of the internal debate in Europe, whether it's a transatlantic world with the US being here and supporting the Polish military effort of negotiating space with Russia, or it's a German-centered Europe without US, because US might be in decline, whatever. And then Germans will need to project power, I mean, to help us build the force in the East, and Poland will be ready to do it, by the way. I think that not all the members of the European Union can say something about it, but Poland will be ready to spend money and feel the force to do it, and we are ready to do it.
Oh yeah, and you will find like-minded countries for sure, because you're not the only one which is now planning to increase military defense budgets and enhance military capabilities. There are other players in Europe which are also interested in that matter. And like you've put it, I mean, with my anticipation for Biden's administration is that it's going to be like, specifically when it comes to the global players, it's going to be very much like, Obama 3.0 institutional approach towards China, probably good weather policy, warming up. I wouldn't even exclude a kind of a institutional entanglement, going back to...
So that means that the United States is going to lose the competition with China if things don't change. Because in my opinion, current trajectory is benefiting China. And a major disruption would need to happen for the United States to have a chance to win. And even with this disruption, it is not certain. Mm-hmm. It's late. It's very late. And for all those that will be listening to us, as they were listening to Edward Ludwig, Americans really are in denial, psychological state of denial. China is not the Soviet Union. China is a power horse of global economy, the main manufacturing actor on the planet Earth, connected from Eurasia to everybody across the mainland, across the maritime routes. It's very difficult to contain the beast in this way.
And not to forget that there are very powerful players within the American establishment that are still very much interested in doing business with China.
Of course, plus there are digital empires of the West and the
Let's face the reality.
Yeah.
So this kind of decoupling is linked to withdrawing symptoms. On the one side, you do realize you need it if you want to stay alive. On the other side, you cannot get rid. And that is the reality.
This is what Mackinder called the going concern. It's very difficult to change the course of a ship because there are so many vested interests that create the balance between labor and capital that it's very difficult to disrupt them because they're going to kill you. So, and this is what we are facing now in the West. If the West really wants to confront China, why the Chinese are very good in controlling this, very good at controlling it. We will see how it develops. I think it's high time we finished, Velina. Velina, I will sort of try to tempt you to have another conversation sometime soon. Velina Tchakarova, Jacek Bartosiak, Vienna, Warsaw, and stay with us. I hope you enjoyed, and let's Velina do it one more time in the future. Thank you very much. That was a conversation about the future of Europe and the great power competition and everything that people dealing with strategy like to listen to. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me with great pleasure.